Focused on quality and convenience, there isn't much you won't find at Marie's Mini Mart. Home-style breads, sandwiches, plus a variety of artisan breads and delicious single-serve desserts available exclusively at our Frecker Drive location. Marie's Mini Mart, with 25 locations wherever you go, there we are.
Hello, I'm Karl Wells. Welcome to Karl Wells Point to Point. Today, my guest is the daughter of one of Newfoundland and Labrador's most famous sons, a cultural icon in this province. His name, Gerald S. Doyle. Now, although we know an awful lot about her dad, Gerald S. Doyle, we don't know very much about her mom, Mary Doyle. And it turns out that her family didn't know that much about her either. Her daughters, or her daughter, I should say, and her sons. Her daughter wanted to know more about her mother. And so she set about on a mission to kind of fill out her mother's story, as it were. And she's written a book about it. The book is called Mary Foley, Mary Doyle. And it's my pleasure to welcome Marjorie Doyle to the program. Hi, Marjorie.
Hi, Karl.
Marjorie, you and your mom, Mary, had at times a bit of a strained relationship. Why did you feel the need to write this book?
I think I first thought of writing the book as soon as she died, because at the time the Globe and Mail used to have a little section called Lives Lived.
That's right.
And you could send in something about somebody belonged to you who had died, and my brothers and I did. And there was a strict word count of 650 words. Now, you know from being in the biz, that's not very many words. Yeah. And when it appeared in the paper and I looked at it and I thought, no, it's so skimpy in comparison with how big I thought she was as a person, as a personality. And I thought too that her life was kind of unusual. She wasn't typical of a woman her age in the times that she lived. And it all just seemed, it begged for more. Marjorie,
your mother was very reluctant to reveal a lot about her life. She kept secrets. So why do you think she was that way?
I don't know. I guess that there were things in her life and in her childhood and in her background that caused her a lot of unhappiness. And I suppose that's a natural thing in all of us, that if there's something that makes you terribly unhappy, you not all of us, but some of us, you'd like to pretend it didn't happen, so you don't talk about it, or you don't think about it, or you park it somewhere or compartmentalize it. I think that was part of it. That, you know, if you have things you don't want to think about, then don't talk about them, and maybe you'll forget about them eventually.
You wrote in your book, and I'm paraphrasing, I apologize if I don't get this right, but you wrote something like, it was as if my mother had placed all her secrets inside a steamer trunk and dragged them down into the grave with her. That's a hell of a statement.
Yeah, but that's what it felt like. I guess we knew so little about, like, most Newfoundlanders know an awful lot about their parentage and their grandparents and all of that, because it's still a pretty, in my childhood anyway, was a small society where people retained connections to where their parents were from and their roots and all of that. We had none of that. I mean, we knew that our mother was raised in Corner Brook and born in Placentia Bay, but we really knew virtually nothing about her. And of all her family, she had, I think, 7 siblings. She was the only one who, in our childhood, was in Newfoundland. And we hadn't known our grandparents or anything like that. And she just didn't talk about these things very much, and we didn't know anything. I'll tell you how secretive she was. She had if you remember Saunders and Howell, which was a furniture making place in Carbonear or Harbour Grace.
Yes.
She had them build a bureau for her with a secret drawer. So, you know, you looked at the bureau, you take all the drawers out, but we eventually found out you take one out and there was a tiny hidden drawer that swung out and swung back. Anyway, so that's a person who wanted to keep her secrets.
That says a lot. Yeah. So you wanted to find out more. You wanted to uncover these secrets, and it was a bit of a detective job.
Yes.
How did you go about finding things out?
I think that many sources. One was, you know, the few things that she had said or indicated or hinted at, I kind of tried to pursue a little bit. I approached some relatives of hers, like 2 sisters of hers, and I went to the archives to look at census records and things like that. I went to the archives of the church was very central to her life and her schooling in Corner Brook when she was a child. And I went to the archives of the congregations that were involved. Also, she did occasionally write things. I mean, she wasn't a writer, but she kept a diary, for example. When we went on a 3-month trip one time, she knew how to do shorthand. So she kept a diary in shorthand, came back, retyped it. We had that. Not that there were secrets in that, because we'd been on that trip, so that's not a good example. But she, the only time she wrote a really revealing piece about her childhood was she was a university student in the 70s at Memorial, and at the time the folklore department was trying to build up an archive, and they wisely asked students to write what you can tell us and what you know about the community you're from. And because my mother was a dutiful student, she was a mature student, she went to university in her 50s, but because she was so dutiful, she sat down and did that. Whereas if we had said to her as her kids, Mom, tell us about your childhood in Corner Brook, write us 15 pages, she would never have done it. But a teacher, a professor, assigned it, so she did the assignment. I didn't find that till after she died. She had lots of university papers, and I still had them. But that one, she did not keep. But of course, it was in the archives of the folklore department at Memorial. So I stumbled on it. I was there doing other things, and I stumbled on that. That was very revealing.
She grew up in Corner Brook. I think her family came from down around Argentia way, but she grew up in Corner Brook, very poor circumstances, right, in the 20s and 30s. Just describe how she grew up.
They grew up at a time when I think things were probably hard anyway. My grandfather, her father, seemed to have had a spotty work history. He seemed to work more like part-time or a few shifts a week. He worked at the Bowater mill. And I don't know if that's because the mill frequently shut down and cut back and things like that, or if he just wasn't able to keep himself employed, but he had a spotty work history, so they never had enough money. They had a big family. And because they were living in Corner Brook as opposed to an outport, they didn't have the resources of a garden. They didn't have the resources of the sea. They didn't have family next door. They didn't have grandfather and grandmother and people sharing a ladder and helping to build a house. Everything, most things that you've heard about people being raised in outports in the 1920s and wasn't true of them. Well, first of all, Corner Brook wasn't an outport. It was urban, but they were urban poor, is what they were. They moved a lot. I don't know anywhere that my mother lived in Corner Brook. I know they moved all the time because they could never pay the rent.
And so, didn't your grandfather, your mother's father, at one point leave the family?
Yes, he did.
He abandoned them.
I think he left, and I can only just assume that, yeah, he abandoned them.
So, can't help but think that had he stayed, they would have been at least a little better off.
I would think, you know, if he stayed and had work, and if they settled in one place and had a home, yeah.
Yeah. Corner Brook. She was actually, at one point, taken under the wing of the Catholic sisters in Corner Brook. And they educated her and nurtured her somewhat. Did they save her, or did they turn her into an ultra-religious person who tended only to see things in black and white?
Well, I think that the the church and the Presentation nuns were central to her childhood. They were central. They were perhaps the best thing in their childhood. They got a very good education, plus training, and by that I mean she later got a secretarial diploma.
Yes.
So educated and trained.
The shorthand.
Yes, yeah, shorthand and typing and all of that. So she was educated and trained, shall we say, by the nuns, and the church was very big in her life. And I think she developed a lifelong love of language and words and reading and writing and education and all of that kind of thing. Was there any negative in terms of being involved with the church? That's what you're sort of asking me. I suppose you could argue that religion perhaps always has a little bit of a double side. There are many advantages to being part of a religion, but maybe sometimes it might be too doctrinaire, or it may make you not make your own judgments, but make a judgment based on what you're told is right and wrong. Is that the kind of thing you're trying to get at?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think in some, and her faith was very real, by the way, when she was somebody who said, I'm not afraid to die, and she meant it. She had strong faith, and at times in her life when she needed to believe in something.
I was just thinking, at one point in the book, you said she didn't like Protestants very much. And in fact, the only Protestant she liked was Jeff Carnell, Sr., the undertaker.
We better unpack everything you've just said. I think what I said, I hope I said, when she was in Corner Brook, finished school and trying to get a job at the mill, she had a job as a shop girl, but she was trying to get a job at the mill because, of course, these would be the great jobs to get. And she told us, so this is not me making a declaration about Protestants or Bowwaters.
Yeah.
She told us that at the time, Catholics in Corner Brook felt it was difficult for them to get jobs at the mill because of religion. She also told us that she encountered one day a man in the street named Major Howard, who was a bigwig at the mill, and she said this to him. She must have been a very bold young woman to, I don't even know, I doubt she knew him personally. She might have just recognized him. I don't know. But in any event, she said this, and she did get a job. But whether, that's fact or not, I don't know. I mean, we have a whole Department of History at Memorial, and I'd like to think that there are young scholars eager to track down more. We've got a lot written about Newfoundland history, but a lot not. It would be interesting to look at the payroll of Bowwaters for all those years, and then look at census and see if there is any truth or validity to that.
Well, she was bold.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
And she was outspoken. And I know this because I saw it myself. I told you earlier that I went to university with Mary. So I can see, you said in the book that she was a shop worker at one point, and at one point she tried to organize the shop workers and create a shop workers union. So she had this sense of social justice, didn't she?
She did, yeah.
Yeah.
She did.
Yeah.
She would always say that her mother, their mother, would defend them in any kind of situation. But in this case, when my mother came home from work one day, she was working at a shop, I think called Neiman's. My information is just what came from Mom. So I'm telling you that she told me she worked at a shop called Neiman's. And one day she came home and told her mother that she had tried to start a union. She was instigating that conversation. And her mother, for the first time ever, didn't support her. She said, go back right now, backpedal on that. Stick to your job because we have to have that.
Yeah.
We can't afford for you to be over there agitating and possibly losing your job. So yeah, she did have a sense of that, and she had a sense of injustices because of an incident. I opened the book with it, in which her mother tried to immigrate to Canada in the late 1930s, and they were essentially rejected because my grandmother had with her her 7-year-old Down syndrome child. And the rage, I guess, or at the injustice of that stuck with my mother and carried over to many aspects of her life.
Yeah. Your mom was, when she worked at Bowwaters, they hired her, and wasn't she the secretary of the mill manager?
The traffic manager, I think.
Traffic manager?
Yeah.
So this kind of put her in a position where she could take advantage of an opportunity to get out of Corner Brook, which she really didn't like. and come to St. John's. Talk about that.
She was, as I say, secretary, maybe personal secretary to the traffic manager or something like that, a decent job. And some change was made in the telephone system at the time she was working there, this particular day. I don't know if it was long distance for the first time or easier long distance, or I don't know, but a technological change came, and it was very exciting. And her boss turned to her and said, "Go ahead, Miss Foley, you can make a long-distance phone call." And I'm imagining, not to take from that man, but I'm imagining that that was an easy thing to say. I mean, it's like me saying to you now, "You go right out there now, my son, and you go to the moon." It's like, I know it's not going to happen, and I don't have... And my mother waited for him to leave the room. She made a long-distance call. She had seen an ad in the newspaper for a merchant in St. John's, or a businessman, I should say, Karl Doyle, looking for a confidential secretary. And she picked up the phone and called him. And this man, who became my dad, was astonished, absolutely astonished, that he received a long-distance phone call from this girl in Corner Brook saying, "I'd like to have the job." And my father hired her. Like, no, send in the resume, no, where are your references, no, what do you know, are you any good, how many words is your shorthand, none of that. It's just, job, done, you're in. Again, I think he was responding to her initiative or energy or boldness or desperation.
And so she moves to St. John's, which she ends up absolutely loving. She loved this city. And she sets up housekeeping at 29 Cochrane Street, and a couple of her sisters join her there, and things roll along very happily. She's your dad's secretary, and then his wife at the time passes away, and eventually he proposes to your mother, and she accepts. And her life changes, and her lifestyle changed dramatically. Talk about that.
Well, it changed radically, and overnight, really. I don't know how long she kept working as his secretary before she quit, before they got married. I'm just going to guess, I don't know, 6 months, 3 months, I don't know. But then, you know, they went on a honeymoon. They got married in Ontario. They went on a honeymoon. And when she came back, she had gone from, you know, renting rooms at the bottom of Cochrane Street with her sisters, to living in a very grand, big, lovely house on 8 acres of land. And she also walked in as the stepmother of 5 boys, because my dad's first wife had died in childbirth. So that little baby was 2.5 years old, and the others were, you know, 9, 11, 13, whatever. So it changed in every way. It changed materially and financially. She no longer had any worries like that. She didn't have to work. I think my father was a big personality, probably a lot of fun, probably very exciting to be around, and so there was all of that. And just the grandeur of it, and a life then of travel, and they had a boat they used to go around Newfoundland in, and yeah, it was quite a change.
Do you think your mother kept secrets from your father?
I don't know. That's an excellent question. And I didn't think about that most of my life. I'll say one thing. She received a poison pen letter when she was Dad's secretary. And it was a particularly mean act. Any anonymous letter, of course, is a mean act. But this was sent to my father at the office, knowing that his personal secretary, my mom, would open it. So it's extra ugly, in my view. But anyway, the letter was basically telling Dad that he would be a fool to marry this woman, and all these terrible things about their family life in Corner Brook and their childhood, which might have been just that they were poor. I don't know, because I don't know what was in the letter. But that leads me to think she had to at least, you know, that must have led to a conversation, because obviously she read it and then she had to pass it to him. There must have been at least a conversation, even if he thought it was all lies. It had to lead to something in the way of a conversation. Whether she revealed other things to him later that I don't want to spoil the book for anybody, but there were all kinds of things, as you know, that I learned after she died, that we learned after she died. Lots and lots and lots of things, and papers and documents and things about the grandfather that we thought was long dead in our childhood, but who was still alive for a good many years after she married Dad. And that kind of thing, I don't know, were those papers, they were well hidden. But I don't know if that hiding came about after he died or while he was alive. I don't know.
Yeah. Now, your father died in 1956.
Yes.
And he was still relatively young, I think 61 or something.
63, I think.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
But this came as a complete shock to your mother, whereas it did not come as a shock to everybody else.
Yes. I think that he made a choice. He knew he was dying. He was sick. He had cancer. He chose not to tell her. And she wasn't thinking along those lines. It's like if you're looking for something or thinking about it, or you see your partner getting more feeble or whatever, but she just simply, it wasn't on the radar at all. But we have photographs from the period just before he died, because one of my brothers got married just before he died. And in the photos, black and white photos from 1956, but you can see, there's a man, he's dying.
He was gaunt.
Oh my gosh, he was gaunt, he was yellow, you know, he looks like he's dying. But she simply, so I guess other people knew but didn't bring it up to her, and he didn't tell her. And when he died, she found a letter that his doctor had written him, and she then could place the time. They were in the Royal York Hotel in Toronto. His doctor was in Toronto for whatever reason, and she could say, yes, I remember that day. He came home, and that's the day the letter is dated. But because she wasn't prepared and didn't know, it came as a terrible shock. It's like the center of her life was just pulled out from under her. He was the center of a big family too, not just her,
of course,
but 8 kids, right? She minded that, by the way. She minded that he hadn't told her. She had a sense that she could have said goodbye better and been prepared and all of that. But I used to have this conversation with her again and again and again. That wouldn't have been a casual decision on his part. I think he would have really thought that through. Is it beneficial for her to know in the last 6 months or year of my life that I'm dying? She won't be able to conceal it from the kids. You know, I just have to trust that he loved her, and he made a decision based on his love for her. And that's that. All speculation on my part.
Yeah. So after your father passed away, a few years or so, I guess, she organized this big trip, this trip to Europe for the whole family, did it all by herself. And you went off and you spent something like 3 months in Europe, you mentioned, and it was, by all accounts, a successful little excursion. And you said something like you felt that she was trying to prove something to herself by organizing that trip.
Perhaps. They had traveled a lot, she and Dad, but of course he made all the arrangements and all the rest of it. I think she really wanted to go to Europe. She wanted to take us, her 3 children, so we were 16, 13, and 10. She wanted to see Europe again. She had been to parts of it. She might have wanted the adventure of travel. She was missing, I suppose, that. And maybe she did want to prove to herself that, I don't know if that was part of it or not. She was adventurous. She loved the word game. I don't know if you hear that word very much anymore. She was game.
Game for anything.
Game for anything.
She was game for anything.
She loved that word. And she was game for this. And she did it. And of course, younger people listening to us here today can hardly imagine what travel was like when there was no internet, no email, no cell phones, no nothing. And we didn't have reservations. I think we had one hotel booked for one thing. Other than that, it was hit and miss, and she did love it.
So eventually she welcomed a Redemptorist priest into your family, Father John O'Dady. O'Dady.
Yeah.
And what role did Father John play?
As a child, I just accepted him. You know, like I didn't remember a time when he wasn't there. I think I was 5 when he came into our lives. And it was just all very normal to me, I suppose, as if you had an uncle or something who would come frequently and hang out. And he was more or less part of the family. And very warm and loving presence in my life, because of course I didn't have a father. And I thought very highly of him. And he was very affectionate with me and very kind. He was a very positive part of my childhood. I think the role he played for my mother was, she wasn't from St. John's, and when she came into Dad's world, the people she met were his friends. Dad, by the way, was 25 years older than Mom, so most of his friends were 25 years older than Mom. So that's the set she came into, and which was probably all very well and good when he was alive, but then when he died, she was without him, but she didn't really have friends of her own, women her age or anything like that. She didn't. She just did not have that. So when this guy, Father O'Dady, came into our lives, he was a lot like her in that they loved to read, they were smart, they were interested in the same things, they liked, you know, Scrabble and word games and all of that kind of thing. And I think what he became to her really was her first best friend. I think he was her best friend, and a friend that didn't know Dad, didn't have anything to do with Dad, and did not come from that era. That's the role I think he played in her life. He made her happy.
Do you think she was in love with him?
Are you allowed to ask me that?
You know, I read the book, and I just came to that conclusion.
As an adult and as a biographer, of course I had to wrestle with that.
Yeah.
As something I never thought about when I was a child, and I never thought about really when she was alive. I think perhaps they did have a relation, not a physical relationship, but they did have a relationship that was different than you'd have with a coworker or your neighbor or your cousin, or, you know, male and females can have relationships that aren't sexual, but they're just that, right? But I think their relationship had the overtones of what we have when we have a sexual relationship. And that just might mean that he was a man, she was a woman, and they loved each other in that way, but it wasn't acted on.
Have you learned everything you need to know about your mom?
I think I have. I think I have. So have you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Thank
being
you
on
very
the
much.
program. And folks, it's a great read. I highly recommend Mary Foley, Mary Doyle, available from Boulder. That's it for this edition of Karl Wells Point to Point. Thank you for watching. See you next time.
If you want convenience, Marie's Mini Mart is here for you. A one-stop shop for a variety of products, home-style breads, sandwiches, plus check out our freshly baked artisan breads and single-serve desserts exclusively at our in-store bakery on Frecker Drive. With 25 locations, wherever you go, there we are.
We want to hear from you. Provide feedback on this show or find out how you can get involved. Call, email us, or scan the QR code to take our quick survey.
You're watching an interesting local show on Rogers TV and you want to know more. That's when you head to rogerstv.com. Our website provides more information about our programs, our hosts, our schedule, and about how you too can get involved with Rogers TV. Visit us online at rogerstv.com.
Sports is life. It's clear cut. Everything's out in the open. There's nowhere to hide. I had to prove myself more than anyone else.
You must be so proud of your son. He's gonna go pro. The sky's the limit.
There's always a winner and a loser.
You cannot reach the sky in broken cleats.